شلام الكل سهد دومتن دمش بخلون قرأت قراوة شلام الكل دوي خينا وشا وخلون جمرة قمال دواوة وعدت قروخ هل سهدوتا يوم الجاوة قانق كليلا كوتا شيوخ قابود بيشتا دمان برشماخ لومتن شويلا ليلا خمتيج ما خشكنا سبيقم كخوي من موصلاتي نو نخرخقا طريد بديره شو يلصيبه وكل رخاته دربته خون.
Ladies and gentlemen, before proceeding with the program, could you please stand for the playing of the Australian National Anthem, followed by the Assyrian National Anthem, and following this, I would ask that we have a 1 minute silence in memory of the victims of the Assyrian, Armenian and Greek genocides. Thank you. Please be seated. I would now like to take this opportunity to formally welcome all guests that are present here tonight. I know some of our guests, including MPs, will be joining us soon. Firstly, the Reverend Father Neil Macker, representing His Beatitude Mighty Melchizedek, Metropolitan of the Assyrian Church of the East. The Very Reverend Father Shnuda Mansour, General Secretary, New South Wales Ecumenical Council. Mr. Hermes Shaheen, Deputy Secretary General of the Assyrian Universal Alliance. Mr. David David, President of the Assyrian Australian National Federation. The Honourable Gladys Berejiklian, MP, Premier of New South Wales. Mr. Craig Kelly, MP, Chair of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Law Enforcement. The Honourable Chris Bowen, MP, Shadow Minister for Health and Member for Planning. The Honourable Tony Davies, MP, Member for Margol. Ms. Julie Finn, MP, Member for Granville. The Honourable Walt Secord, MLC, Deputy Leader of the Opposition in the Legislative Council. Dr Hugh McDermott, MP, State Member for Prospect. Mr Guy Zangari, MP, State Member for Fairfield. Reverend the Honourable Ned Fred Nile, MLC, President of the Christian Democratic Party, and Ms Solon Nile. The Honourable Lou Amato, MLC. Ms Sophie Kotsis, MP, Member for Canterbury. The Honourable David Clark, MLC. Ms Susie David, Advisor to the Assyrian Universal Alliance. Ms Helen David, Councillor Paul Azzo and Councillor Dilene. Mr. Olivia Dreyfus, Community Liaison Officer, New South Wales Department of Home Affairs, Ms. Laura Valerian, Multicultural Community Liaison Officer at the Department of Social Services, Dr. Paul Power, Chief Executive of the Refugee Council of Australia, Ms. Linda Ben Menashe, Community Relations Manager of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies, Ms. Karen Boss, Vice President of the Christian Faith and Freedom, Dr Anahit Khosroeva, Ph.D. and leading researcher at the Department of Armenian Genocide Studies in the Institute of History, Dr Panagiotis Diamatis, Vice President of the Australian Institute for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, Mr Edward Dinka, Principal, and Ms Mary Ismail, Deputy Principal of St Narseh Assyrian Christian College, Mr Anwar Atto, representing St Herman's Assyrian Primary School, Mr John Nord, Head of Public Affairs, Council Coptic Orthodox Diocese of Sydney, Dr Paul Burgess, Executive Principal, Presbyterian Ladies College, Sydney, and Mrs Burgess, Mr Haig Kassirian, Executive Director, Armenian National Committee of Australia, Ms Maria Anthony, President, United Pontian Benevolent Brotherhood, Pontox Negus of New South Wales, Milan Maximovic from the Australian Christian Nation Association, Mr George Mansour, United Nations Peacekeeping, Mr Peter Pavlidis, President of the Federation of Pontian Associations of Australia, Mr Demetrius Hopleas, Vice President of the Pontox Negus New South Wales, and from the Iraqi Australian University Forum, Dr Bushra Al-Abaidi and Dr Ahmed Al-Rabai, Dr Inam Jajo and Mr Jalil Daman, and George Barch of New South Wales Police Forum. We also welcome delegates from the Assyrian Australian Academic Society, Assyrian Australian Association, Assyrian Charity and Educational Community, Assyrian Church of the East Relief Organisation, Assyrian Church of the East Youth Association, Assyrian Cultural and Social Youth Association, Assyrian Democratic Organisation, Assyrian Democratic Party, Assyrian Carnival Social Association, Bet Nahran Democratic Party Australia, and New South Wales Babylon Cultural Association. And we received apologies from Mr John Alexander, IAM MP, Member for Bennelong, the Honourable Tony Burke, MP, Manager of Opposition Business, Ms Anne Stanley, MP, Member for Werribee, Senator the Honourable Christina Kennelly, Deputy Leader of the Opposition in the Senate, and Leslie Dalton, Regional Director of New South Wales and AST Immigration and Citizenship Services. Now, before commencing with the program, we'll invite Reverend Father Neil Macca from the Assyrian Church of the East for an opening prayer.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, forever. Amen. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, as in heaven so on earth. Give us the bread of our need this day, and forgive us our debts, as we forgave our debtors. And bring us not into trial, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom, and power, and glory, forever and ever. Amen. Raise our Lord, our departed by your compassion, and place them at your right hand. Clothe them with glory and honour in your kingdom, and number them among the good and righteous who have pleased you. For you are the ruler of both the visible and invisible world which you have created, O Lord of the dead and the living. By the prayers of your saints, our Lord and our God, be reconciled to us, and by the request of your true disciples, make our sins to pass away, and pardon that which is wanting in us. Make our enemies peaceful, quicken our departed, and make us worthy of the excellent glory of your kingdom, with the just and righteous who fulfilled your will, in the Jerusalem which is above, Lord of all, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, forever. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Father Macca. For an official welcome, please join me in welcoming the Deputy Secretary General of the Assyrian Universal Alliance, Mr. Homer Shaheen.
كهنة ومشمشاني قيرة أرخن وغبة رمشوخن طاوة إتلن تيانتد من تيجورتا من كلوخن الهدرتوخن يداها أوانا رشمايا الزيوخ بيومة رشيطانايا يوم السهدة أطوراي يقارر بجورة لقاتن همزمتي بتويا بلشانين لسنايا. Reverend Father, distinguished and honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to acknowledge the traditional honors of this beautiful land and pay my respects to the elders past and present. It's with great pleasure and honor that I welcome you all to this sacred day of commemoration when Assyrians around the world gather to remember their martyrs. We are deeply honored to see so many of you gathered here today to remember our Assyrian brothers and sisters who fell victims to Ottoman aggressions and violence. I extend a warm welcome and appreciation to the honorable members of federal, state, parliament, and local government. I would like to acknowledge the presence of the Honorable Gladys Berejiklian, Premier of New South Wales. We are proud of your achievements and extraordinary leadership and wish you great success. I also thank representatives of the Armenian, Greeks, Copts, Jewish, and Assyrian organization for their presence here tonight. Our sincere appreciation to our keynote speaker, Dr. Anahit Khosroeva, who has come all the way from Armenia, and hopefully we will get our guest speaker, Dr. Panagiotis. We are truly honored and thankful to have both of you here with us to mark this significant event in the Assyrian calendar. I am sure you will share with us a great deal of knowledge and experience to better our understanding of this pivotal piece of Assyrian history. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather every year to join in solemn remembrance of the genocide of 1915 that was perpetrated by the Ottoman Turkey and the 104 years that have passed since that horror. As we recall the genocide and reflect on its aftermath, we acknowledge the ways in which the Assyrian, Greek, and Armenian people have sought to find healing and move forward. We will always remember our victims of this dreadful genocide so that even those who did not experience it may learn of its cruel nature, its terrible cause, and draw lessons that will make it impossible to repeat. For centuries, genocide, massacre, and forced removal have become a normal way of life for our Assyrian community. To this day, history is repeating itself for the Assyrians. Our people are being systematically driven out from their ancestor lands in Iraq and Syria. Assyrians have been subject to gross violations of their human rights by way of murder, rape, assault, and forced conversion to Islam. Furthermore, the Kurdish regional government is engaging in discriminatory behavior against Assyrians by illegally occupying and transferring Assyrian-owned lands to Kurdish squatters. The Kurds continue to use ruthless measures and terror tactics to intimidate Assyrians in a bid to consolidate illegally confiscated Assyrian towns and villages. Currently, the Assyrians are at the most dangerous point in their history. The sole purpose of the systematic destruction of our cities and our ancient archaeological sites in Syria and Iraq by ISIS, the illegal occupation of the Assyrian lands by the Kurd squatters, the targeted attacks and forced evacuation is to end both Assyrian national existence, which has become the symbol for indigenous ownership of land, and to eliminate the Christian presence in the Middle East. The sacrifice of our people will only increase our resolve, strength, and solidarity to defend our nation's right to exist in their homeland, Assyria, the cradle of civilization, which our forefathers founded on the value of sacrifice. The time has come for all Western nations, including Australia, to lend a helping hand and support the Assyrians' resolve for their rights and the demand for protected Assyrian region on our ancestral lands in northern Iraq, before we witness an even more devastating event than that of 1915. From this official platform, we raise our voice and promise that we will continue seeking justice for our martyrs, innocent souls, and recognition of the Assyrian, Armenian, and Pontic genocide. Justice will only be served for our people and our martyrs by acknowledging and condemning the actions of those responsible, the Ottoman Turks and the Kurds, and by calling on Turkey, being the legal successor of the Ottoman Empire, to admit and account for the crimes of their ancestors. Glory and honor to our Assyrian, Armenian, and Greek martyrs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shane. Our next speaker is a passionate and great supporter of the Assyrian national cause. Please welcome the host of this evening's seminar and the Deputy Chair of the Parliamentary Friends of Assyria, the Honourable Tanya Davies, MP and Member for Marlborough.
Thank you, Paul. Good evening to you all. Can I just make a general acknowledgement of all of the MPs who are present with us, state, federal and local government representatives, to our bishops and reverend fathers, to the other dignitaries who have given up their time to come and signify this important evening, to everyone else who has taken the time out of your busy schedule to pause and to be available and open to listen to an incredible array of speakers that once again I'm sure will continue to spur us on and encourage us to pursue the cause of justice on behalf of the Assyrian people who are scattered all around the world. Tonight's event is essential to ensure that we as a community here in New South Wales, Australia, will never forget the atrocities of the past, whether that be a few years ago or more than a century ago or even further afield. Can I thank you all for being here tonight? Can I also ask you to continue to speak about this amongst your family, friends and your networks? And let's work together across all levels of government, across all aspects of our community, to ensure that justice is done on behalf of the Assyrian Martyrs, that justice is done to ensure the appropriate acknowledgement and responsibility. Because as I wrote a piece to a significant representative in our community a few years ago, until we acknowledge the past, we cannot begin to repair and build our future. So thank you tonight for coming. I congratulate you all, particularly the organisers who've put this event together and our guest speakers. Welcome to the New South Wales Parliament. And may I now please extend a wonderful welcome, and please would you acknowledge the Honourable Premier Gladys Berejiklian to come and address you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you to my parliamentary colleague Tanya Davies, and it's reassuring for me that day to day you have many advocates in the New South Wales Parliament, of which she is one, but I want to acknowledge all of my state and federal parliamentary colleagues, because no matter which side of the House we sit, we come here united. We come here to support the Assyrian community in New South Wales. And I want to start by acknowledging the Reverend Fathers who are here, the community leaders, in particular Hermes Shaheen and David from the Universal Assyrian Alliance, Paul the MC, who represents the current and future generations of young Assyrians, and say that it gives me a great degree of comfort that we come together on August 7 on this solemn day of commemoration, as do hundreds of thousands of people across the globe. And wherever there is an Assyrian school, as an Assyrian community, an Assyrian function, you have your nation. A nation that has survived millennia. Millennia as in plural, thousands and thousands of years. A nation that will continue to survive into the future. And a nation that deserves the respect and acknowledgement of the broader community. Assyrians have always been extremely generous in not just acknowledging their plight and not just acknowledging their martyrs, but also victims of genocide of any race and any nation. And I'm deeply grateful for that. You never have a function without mentioning other communities that have suffered as you have suffered. And all of us here, and I include myself, are survivors of victims of genocide. And unfortunately, when I saw images of what's happening now in the Middle East, I can recollect the plight of my own family and our own churches, our own institutions that are going through a second wave of genocide in a different form. And that displacement continues to be a challenge for communities like the Assyrians and other minorities throughout the Middle East. But I want to today say to you that you have our blessing, our gratitude, and our support, and I say so on behalf of the people of New South Wales because I can in my job. You have the support of 8 million citizens who thank you for your contribution to New South Wales, but acknowledge your plight for recognition, for justice, and for a strong future. And I join you in that. And I also especially want to acknowledge the outstanding achievements by your guest speakers, in particular Anahit Khosroeva, who's come here all the way from Armenia. She only speaks 4 languages, and I'm proud to say I can converse with her in 2 of them. But she is an example of an academic who is really bringing the Assyrian plight to global attention. And we should encourage people like that who give themselves to support the future of one of the oldest cultures and oldest nations on the planet. And ladies and gentlemen, it is with deep empathy, deep gratitude, deep acknowledgement, and also deep humility on behalf of my colleagues and I. And there's one colleague who's no longer in Parliament, but who is still supporting you. I want to acknowledge David Elliott. David Clark. How could I forget David a second ago? But David actually, not that I didn't have a close relationship with the Assyrian community, but David introduced us, our party, to the Assyrian community many years ago. And I just want to acknowledge that you know the measure of a person when they keep turning up when they don't have to. None of us feel we have to, but please know that our heart is with you. So I regret that I can't be here for Anahit's presentation. I've had the honour of meeting her on a number of occasions, and for those of you who are listening to her for the first time, you will be moved, you will be informed, and you will feel inspired about the future. And I acknowledge all the other academics here who will contribute to tonight's proceedings. But I leave you on this special solemn occasion on August 7, saying that we will never forget, we will never stop fighting for what is right. We will never stop fighting against the forces of denial which encourage genocidal states to keep going, and that is the risk. And we stand along the Assyrian community in New South Wales and around the world in saying that basic human rights, survival of nations, is a given, and we will continue to fight for justice into the future. Thank you so much for having me.
Our keynote speaker tonight is an Assyrian activist and historian who was born in Armenia. She's a leading researcher at the Department of Armenian Genocide Studies in the Institute of History, Armenian National Academy of Sciences. Dr. Khosroeva is an associate professor at Yerevan State University, and for the past 13 years has been a scholar in residence at North Park University in Chicago, USA, where she has taught courses on genocide studies. She's the author of many research books and monographs, as well as numerous articles on the history of genocide of Assyrians, Armenians and Greeks during the Ottoman period of 1894 to 1923. Her research interests include comparative genocide studies and human rights. For the past decade, Professor Khosroeva has been an active member of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, International Network of Genocide Scholars, and has presented at various academic and political conferences. On March 24, 2015, by the continuous efforts of Dr. Khosroeva, and a month before the commemoration of the centennial of the Armenian Genocide, the National Assembly of the Republic of Armenia unanimously passed a resolution recognising the Assyrian and Greek genocides committed by the Ottoman Empire during 1915 to 1923. For her outstanding services, Dr. Khosroeva has received numerous awards, as well as state and presidential medals. Today she continues to be an active voice in raising further awareness, recognition, and ultimately justice for the Assyrians, Armenians, and Greeks. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Anahit Khosroeva and her topic tonight, Turkish nationalism and the Assyrian genocide.
Thank you, Paul, for beautiful introduction. I want to take a minute and to say thank you so much to Assyrian Universal Alliance of Australia inviting me to Australia and to present today for this Assyrian Martyrs Day and to be here. I'm privileged and honored to speak today to to be a keynote speaker for this beautiful event, and thank you for all the organizers to put this gathering together. Today I'm going to speak about the Turkish nationalism and the Assyrian genocide. The Assyrian genocide, along with Armenian and Greek genocides, was the first intent ethnic cleansing and mass extermination of the 20th century, which occurred in the Ottoman Empire during the First World War. Hundreds of thousands of Assyrians perished as a result of execution, deportation, starvation, diseases, the harsh environment, and physical abuse. The systematic manner in which the massacres and slaughters of Assyrians was conducted, along with the documented intentions of Turkish leaders and sheer number of individuals murdered, demonstrate that the Turkish government planned and to a great extent succeeded in fulfilling a policy of genocide toward the Assyrian people. With the criminal connivance of the world's major powers and taking the opportunity presented by the martial law, Turkey committed the gravest crime against humanity, genocide. The First World War was an ideal context in which Ottoman state could accomplish this goal. The war not only absorbed the resources and focus of the world's major powers, but it also created a morally ambiguous atmosphere where brutality and death on a massive scale could be justified or trivialized. The Assyrians, whose Christian identity and cultural durability were perceived by Turkish nationalists to be undesirable obstacles to the realization of a pan-Turkic nation, found themselves barriers of a misfortune with reverberations lasting to this very day. The professional investigation of the anatomy of the Ottoman Empire by a lot of worldwide scholars let us deduce that the latter bore crime and genocide and topologically could categorized as a genocidal state. The Ottoman state system with inclination to slaughters and genocide had provided itself with an adequate concept, a theoretical foundation for the preparation and perpetration of, in our case, the Assyrian genocide. Let us see what was the causes of Assyrian genocide in the Ottoman Empire. The Armenian genocide counts as the first modern genocide, which was the presently understood by much of the world to have been the climax of a long history of oppression and violence for a group that had suffered for centuries as a Christian minority at the hands of the Turks. Henry Morgenthau, who served as US ambassador in Constantinople until 1916, stated in his memoirs, "The Armenians are not the only subject people in Turkey which have suffered from this policy of making Turkey exclusively the country of the Turks. The story which I have told about the Armenians, I could also tell with certain modification about the Greeks and the Assyrians." Nevertheless, the suffering of the Assyrians, largely forgotten internationally and not recognized as genocide, which embedded the descendants of the victims. This ancient civilized nation faced the menace of total physical extermination in the name of bringing about the dream of the young Turks to create a pure Turkish state. The genocidal quality of the murderous campaigns against not only the Armenians but also Assyrians and Greeks is obvious. Historians who realize that the young Turks' extermination policies against Armenians, Assyrians, and Greeks have to be analyzed together and understood as an entity are therefore often tend to speak of a Christian genocide. The destruction of these free Christian communities was one aspect of the homogenizing process when a modern state with its destructive power out of ideological radicalization identified part of its own civilians as undesirable. Like other Christians living in the empire, about 1 million Assyrians were treated as second-class citizens. Slavery was fate of some Ottoman Christians. Many Assyrians studied in Turkish educational institutions, but getting their diplomas found no opportunities for employment in public positions of authority. They didn't have an opportunity to economically develop their regions. Turkish authorities restricted where the Assyrians lived so that they could not form a majority among the other nations with whom they lived. This was done in order to deprive them of the possibility of putting up a united front. The first anti-Assyrian programs of a genocidal nature appeared in the middle of the last decade of the 19th century. This violence directed and perpetrated against unarmed people in the peacetime marked the beginning of a development of a state genocidal program. It was organized by Sultan Abdul Hamid II, who exercised one-man rule, and important political decisions were made by him alone. Its implementation ended in mass killings of the Assyrian population of the Ottoman Empire, whose victims totaled 55,000 just in 1 year. The Assyrian Church of the Holy Mother of God gave refuge to many Assyrians, Armenians, and Greeks. Here, a revealing exchange occurred when the several Assyrians suggested to their priest that the Armenian refugees be expelled from the building so as not to aggravate Turkish sentiment. The Assyrian priest replied, "The people who cross themselves will stay in church to the end. Should we be killed, we will be killed together." End of quote. The genocidal nature of Sultan Abdul Hamid's anti-Assyrian policy is beyond any doubt. Several of the circumstances from which international criminal tribunals judges infer genocide were present: mass killings, large-scale rapes, destruction of village and religious sites, and deportation of civilians. Assyrian villages and towns were sacked by organized mobs or by Kurdish bands. Tens of thousands were driven from their homes. About 100,000 Assyrians of 245 villages were forcibly converted to Islam. Their property was plundered. All possessions, such as gold, silver, money, were confiscated. Thousands of Assyrian men, women, children, and old people were brutally assassinated. The Assyrian women and girls were forced into Turkish and Kurdish households. The slaughters were perpetrated as barbarously as possible, regardless of gender or age. Thus, atrocity became a policy. On June 2, 1895, the New York Times reported, "We have the anonymous verdict of the native Christians of Turkey, Armenians, Assyrians, and Greeks, that the Sultan is personally responsible not only because he gave direct orders that men, women, and children should be tortured, outraged, and murdered, but because for years past he has persistently followed a course that would infallibly end in just such a condition of things as the present." The Austro-Hungarian ambassador to Constantinople in those days defined it as a crusade of Muslims against the Christians. When on July 23, 1908, the Young Turks Party Union and Progress organized a revolt and seized the power, all the people of the empire, Muslims or Christians, vigorously welcomed the overthrow of the Red Sultan. They hoped it was the dawning of new age in the history of the Ottoman Empire. But as appeared shortly after, the Young Turks were ardent nationalists who continued the policy of oppressions and slaughters carried out prior to them by the sultans. They were advocates of the idea of assimilation of all the peoples of the empire. Thus, the radical wing of the Young Turks didn't limit its ambition to governing a multinational Ottoman state. It espoused a complete ideology which envisioned the remarking of the Ottoman Empire into an exclusively Turkish nation. The Young Turks intended to transform the pluralistic Ottoman Empire into an ethnically, religiously homogeneous national state. Christians couldn't have an equal part in such a new society. The ambitions of the Young Turks, however, extended beyond this primary goal. According to Taner Akçam, the Committee of Union and Progress had formulated prior to the First World War a policy that they began to execute in Aegean region against the Greeks, and during the war years expanded to include the Assyrians and especially the Armenians, a policy that eventually became genocidal. During one of the secret meetings, the Young Turks ideologist Dr. Nazim said, "Massacre is necessary. I want Turks and only Turks to live on this soil and to be in full possession of it. The hell with all the non-Turkish elements, no matter what their nationality or religious is." According to German missionary and humanist Dr. Johannes Lepsius, the Young Turks Party program stated, "Sooner or later, all the nations under the Turkish control will be turned into Turks. It is clear that they will not convert voluntarily and they will have to use force." The Young Turks wouldn't wait for circumstances to define their policy. They would seek the opportunity to proceed with their plans. That occasion offered itself sooner than expected in 1914, when Europe plunged into the First World War, and the Young Turk triumvirate, Minister of Interior of Talat Pasha, Minister of War Enver, and Minister of the Navy Cemal, who had been governing the Ottoman Empire since 1913, secretly and eagerly brought their country into the war. The Young Turks' overall aim was a demographic reorganization of the Ottoman Empire. The ruling Committee of Union and Progress decided an extreme solution: the wholesale deportation of all Armenians and Assyrians to the Syrian deserts, which in really meant mass murder. All deportations were planned and supervised by the Directorate for the Settlement of Tribes and Immigrants that belonged to the Ottoman Ministry of Interior. The deportations began with scattered removals in February 1915 and gathered speed in March after the Young Turks dismissed the Ottoman Parliament, silencing a possible source of opposition to their plans. Christian communities were uprooted on a vast scale beginning in late May with the deportation law, which you see in your monitor in Turkish language, which coming from the Ministry of Internal Affairs with Talat Pasha's signature, and it was issued as a temporary emergency decree by the Young Turks. It was published in the government newspaper and posted in public areas. The law gave the government authority to deport the entire population of towns, villages, and rural areas where inhabitants were suspected of engaging in espionage or sedition, if necessary by force. The task of carrying out the order was given to members of the Turkish police, many of whom had been recruited especially for the job by the Teşkilat-i Mahsusa, or special organization, the secret police force responsible for organizing the deportation. According to contemporary accounts, some of these police people were hardened criminals who had been released from prison for this very reason. The forced deportation was in every sense a death march. When the elderly or the weak fell or took a rest, the police would promptly finish them off with a rifle shot or more commonly a sword. Often the people on the march were denied food and water by the police. By the time most of the refugees reached their final destination, if they made it that far, they were sick with diseases, weak, and in grave danger of dying due to starvation, or sickness or dehydration. Often due to lack of foodstuffs, people were forced by hunger to eat grass, dead animals that had died from exposure. In many places, this is the deportation map. In many places, the police families by murdering young and middle-aged male population who might have tried to resist in some cases. They led the men to the outskirts of towns and killed them by shooting them or stabbing them with swords, while in other cases they left the work to groups of Kurdish bandits. Consul Leslie David wrote to U.S. Ambassador Morgenthau that the system that is being followed seems to be they have bands of Kurds awaiting them on the road to kill the men, especially and incidentally some of the others. The entire movement seems to be the most thorough, organized and effective massacre this country has ever seen. In some places, the men were separated out from the marching columns of the deportees and executed in front of their female relatives. This document is new, and it says that an Assyrian female survivor recounted witnessing her father's execution, saying that they asked all the men and boys to separate from the women, and after that, when they separated them, they started to kill them, and many of them women couldn't take it, and they threw themselves in the river, and they also died. And she was saying how her father was killed that time. After the loss of their male protectors, women and girls were easy prey to physical abuse, including rape and murder. About this, we have an American missionary in Urfa, Leslie, who wrote to the U.S. consul in Aleppo, Jackson, relating stories that he heard from deportees, as well as his own eyewitness testimony. When he was saying what everybody, they tell the same story, how they suffered and how the people they were killed in front of them. So now, also one more evidence of deportation and mass killings of Assyrians. This is Ottoman documents on deportation of Assyrians in Turkish language, coming from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with the stamp and the signature of Talat Pasha. We are lucky to have it because it's a proof of our genocide. And just I want to say that atrocities of the Assyrians, as we know, were perpetrated with unspeakable brutality. All possible methods of killing were used: shooting, stabbing, stoning, crushing, throat cutting, throwing off of roofs, drowning, and decapitation. It is absolutely impossible to read the multiple trustworthy documents describing those atrocities and remain apathetic or indifferent. One document reads, "The skulls of small children were smashed with rocks, and bodies and girls and women who resisted rape or conversion to Islam were chopped into pieces. Men were mostly beheaded or thrown into nearby river. The clergy, monks, and nuns were skinned or burned alive." And we have thousands of these kind of documents regarding the Assyrian genocide. In November 1916, the New York Times wrote, "The Armenians are not the only unfortunate. The Assyrians also have been decimated. Great numbers have perished, but no one knows how many." Another American periodical wrote, Atlantic Monthly, "Within 6 months, the young Turks succeeded on doing what the old Turks were unable to accomplish in 6 centuries. Thousands of Assyrians vanished from the face of the earth." Thus, the massacres and slaughters of the Assyrians, which took place at the end of the 19th century and during the First World War in the Ottoman Empire, were clearly a form of genocide, the contemporary term for any attempt to destroy a nationalistic, ethnic, or religious group in whole or in a part. As in the other recognized genocides, the Ottoman and their local allies, the Kurdish and Persian, demonstrated a pattern of deliberate and systematic targeting of Christians as such, including Assyrians, for murder, maiming, enslavement, rape, dispossession, impoverishment, and cultural and ethnic destruction. Nevertheless, governments and historians have not been as willing to recognize the Assyrian experience during and after World War I a form of genocide, or even to acknowledge the existence and criminality of Ottoman atrocities against Assyrians. But as we saw, the Assyrian genocide was by no means accidental or unexpected. It logically derived from the brutal and nationalistic policy pursued by the Turkish sultans and later on the Young Turks against the non-Turkish nations during the preceding decades. It was not a policy of individual, but an official state policy, which included persecution and carnage. The most brutal slaughters of the hundreds of thousands of Assyrians were perpetrated. And in conclusion, where do we stand after more than a century since the state orchestrated massacres and deportations happened to my people? Turkey refuses to acknowledge any genocide on its own soil. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who recently described the persecution of Muslims in Myanmar as genocide, said that it is impossible for Muslims to commit genocide. Kurdish nationalist leaders today continue to persecute Assyrians in their own land, while occasionally invoking the events of a genocide as a way to underscore the need for an independent Kurdish state dominated by the particular leadership making the invocation. Yet in a part of the world where markers are stacked like currency for claims made on the present, it is no surprise that the legacy of Assyrian genocide, like ownership of the land that hosted it, is still up for grabs. The Assyrian genocide is still an open wound for its people, an unfinished chapter in world history. For the guilty party, yes, to receive the punishment it deserves. Thank you so much for your time.
I'd now like to call up to the stage an amazing and passionate young lady, and a truly inspiring Assyrian youth to deliver her speech. Please welcome to the stage Ms. Bertil Tigris David, student at Presbyterian Ladies College, Sydney.
A girl called Mimni, just 14 years old, married off by the church in order to not be alone when fleeing the genocidal act to her people and her village, married in fear of the Ottoman Empire's attack on the Christians. She left behind her massacred father and uncles and all that she had. Along the way, she witnessed thousands of others escaping the merciless atrocities, and saw many who were unable to continue the long and dangerous journey. After a few more days in all the chaos, her mother became very tired and begged to be left behind on the snow-covered mountains. This girl had to continue running with her husband and her 3-year-old brother, knowing that she had left